Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Aaron Eisenberg. I am a project manager at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung New York office. And welcome to Night of Degrowth. We're really excited to have you all, and I'm going to pass it over to our office director, Andreas Gunther, for opening words. Thank you all for joining us.
Yes, hello, welcome. In the name of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung New York office, I'd like to welcome you all. First of all, our panelists and of course, everybody who joined us today for this Night of Degrowth. For those who are not so familiar with us, Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is an international operating non-governmental NGO based in Berlin, Germany, and in New York office. We're working on civic education and political research. And the New York office is the office for North America and the United Nations. In our United Nations Dialogue program, we have covered for several years, amongst other issues, the UN climate process. And when we talk about what could be the answers, what will be the answers to the challenges of climate change, but not only of climate change, but also other environmental crises. I think we have to talk about degrowth. At the same time, degrowth is a concept that needs a lot of explanation. It's not popular and it's not self-explaining in a way, if we want it to be understood in the way it is meant. And so the RLS NYC had undertaken the effort to explain it by popular means. We have produced the degrowth pamphlet. We have produced a video. And that is a first step, because I think also the concept of degrowth needs more debate on several levels, and it needs more explanation, more popularization. I hope this is an English word, excuse me. And for this, we organized this night to talk about those issues, to present the work we have done so far. And I can promise RLS NYC will continue to work on this concept. In this sense, I wish you interesting, entertaining, and a fruitful evening. And I give back the floor to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Andreas, and really appreciate that introduction. So what we're going to do for our run of show tonight is we're going to start off by showing that Demystifying Degrowth video, and then I'm going to introduce the designers of that pamphlet and video, the Spumoni Cooperative, and they're going to talk a little bit about their process, how it came about, and their cooperative in itself. And then we're going to pass it along and move along into a moderated discussion with Erica Jung and Jamie Tyberg, the two authors of the pamphlet, but also other degrowth pieces for our office. And we'll get into some questions, and then we will try to open up the Q&A function on the bottom of the panel for you all to add your own questions as well. So I'm going to try to share this video right now. And start us off on our Demystifying Degrowth video. Hopefully this works.
Demystifying Degrowth. We are taught that buying more things right now is good for us and for the economy. We are not taught that if everyone used as much energy as the average American, we would need 5 planets. We are also taught to do things that grow the economy and maximize short-term growth. But luxury condos earn money quicker than community health clinics. Arming millions for war swells the economy more than conflict mitigation. Instead of extending the life of our products to reduce waste, we're encouraged to replace our electronics every year and buy new clothes every season. Our economy is based on our right to consume, but not our right to live. But the soil must be fertile for us to eat. The air and water must be clean for us to live, to plan for the future, to find meaning in our lives. How can the economy be reassembled to grow these things? This is the core of degrowth, which embraces a care-based economy, meaning we produce in accordance with ecological limits and divide it up to fulfill everyone's needs. To think of work that does not inherently require consumption or mass production and instead sustains life. Teaching children how to read, restoring acres of soil, helping people heal from trauma. These are all degrowth. A society that defines productivity and labor not by profit, but by time dedicated to oneself, to family, friends, and to activities that affirm one's humanity. By organizing ourselves around the principles of care, sufficiency, and autonomy, we also reduce our consumption of energy and materials. Imagine a world that measures wealth and prosperity not by how life is destroyed, but how life is created, supported, and nourished. A world that ensures future generations clean air, water, and soil. It's more than possible. It's necessary. Degrowth is a movement to unlearn the dominant ideology of infinite growth that has been ingrained in every aspect of our individual and collective lives.
Okay, and so that was this fantastic video, and I'm going to actually, I'm going to bring in the designers now of that fantastic video, and have them kind of explain to us how this process went about from a design lens, and then also if they were familiar at all with degrowth beforehand, and if not, how they kind of came to it in this project to illustrate it as such, and kind of what came about. And then lastly, if they could talk a little bit about the Spumoni Cooperative and what kind of work they've done for Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, but also in general.
Okay. We're Spumoni Cooperative. We're a 3-member worker-owned co-op doing design and animation. We have a couple of different clients, but we've been working with Rosa Lux for about a year now, and making various educational and promotional materials for them. So the Degrowth pamphlet was one of the things that we worked on last year with them. It was a really cool project, and we were really excited to have the opportunity to expand it into a video.
And then, okay, yeah, so just about how we got involved with Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. Warren and I had done another, like a toolkit about it was like the Trinational Workers Toolkit, just about, labor solidarity. And then that kind of spun into more work with RLS. And I believe we initially pitched a quote, and I was like, maybe we were both kind of connected with Erin through some other movement work that we were both doing. So yeah, we're just kind of plugged into that space, and then, got rolling with this kind of ongoing contract, and that's been really awesome. In terms of if we had been familiar with degrowth, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I was the most familiar with it, Emily the least, and Warren was like a little touch and go. And I will say I was mostly just familiar from Twitter fights. So yeah, I thought this was a really cool project to work on, because I do think it is like the concept that's so simple and yet gets very convoluted, for good reason, because obviously there's a lot of implications. But yeah, it was really fun to work on. And I'll kick it to Warren to talk about more about the vision for it.
Yeah, we kind of, the brief was to kind of like take this concept out of like academia and more into like a space where it was kind of more shareable and understandable. And so like initially we we basically like went in with a kind of more like abstract thing, more black and white, and then somewhat, I'm not sure who said it, but someone suggested like children's book maybe was more like very colorful, because like that's kind of what we want to illustrate, is like that, how that like colors and the beauty of life. So like we kind of went a completely different direction and tried to really make like the concept as approachable as possible with like the illustration and then into the animation.
Awesome. And I think everyone can see what an amazing job you all did on this, and also on the pamphlet. And just for everyone to know, if you go to the rosalux.nyc website, we have the video was adapted from a pamphlet, correct? And can you talk a little bit, just shortly, what that was like, adapting a pamphlet? Was that something you'd had experience with, or was that something completely new and having to build off of that?
I personally had no experience adapting a pamphlet into a video, but I did feel like the text that we got from Rosa Luxemburg did kind of lend itself to this really like vibrant picture book story, and then taking that story from the pamphlet to the video did feel sort of natural. I think we had discussed maybe doing a website instead. So like something that would be more shareable than a pamphlet, like easy to just send someone on a phone. But I think we landed on video as like an easier piece of content to give someone. And I'm glad we did. I think it turned out really nice.
Totally. And I think that's actually a wonderful segue to bring in the authors of that fantastic pamphlet, who are Jamie Tyberg and Erica Jung. And just Jamie and Erica have now worked with RLS over the last year, putting out degrowth materials. And I think one thing I wanted to ask for Jamie and Erica was working with designers. I know this was perhaps the first time you've done this for this. And were these ideas of degrowth kind of what you had envisioned coming to life here?
I can start. Hi, everyone. It's good to see everyone's faces. Yeah, it was really, I mean, I think for us, it was sort of letting the pros do their work, since, you know, I have no experience in illustrating or even really bringing like text to life in a way that they did with the pamphlet and the video. I remember the conversation just being really short. I really feel like working with people who are, you know, politically aligned in, you know, the movement work we're doing, and I guess, you know, the sort of future that we want to build together. It was really easy for us to just sort of speak the same language and click on the vision.
Yeah, I remember Warren brought up the idea of like a children's book, or like someone else did in one of our meetings. And I really like that idea. I think like all too often, a lot of, you know, the type of entertainment we see on climate change is very depressing. I mean, like, I haven't seen Don't Look Up yet, but I've heard that it's like, you know, not very optimistic. And we wanted to create something for like people to look forward to, you know, like degrowth is like, it's an imaginary, but it doesn't always have to be within like the framework of idealism. It can be something we strive towards, and we wanted something that was accessible, and not just towards people in like academia, but, you know, to kids too, because, you know, everybody should get a chance to learn about degrowth. And I really felt like, you know, the animation that Spumoni Cooperative worked on did a really good job of like getting that to a broad audience.
I think we all can agree on that. And I want to just thank the Spumoni Cooperative for being here with us tonight, and gonna go into a few questions with Jamie and Erica now, but we'll stick around and hopefully there are some other questions during the Q&A. But thank you so much for being here and all the amazing work on it right now. And so I kind of, to that point that you just made, like there's been a lot of positive feedback on this pamphlet, but also on the video, and saying how accessible it is. And something you talked about, Erica, you just brought up, was kind of wanting to bring it out of the realm of academia and bring it out of kind of its traditional base, where degrowth has, I don't know, generally come out of this Western European base in a way, is kind of what some people say. And so I guess like a question for you, like people have said, this all sounds amazing. This sounds great. This sounds like a wonderful platform. I'm all bought in. This sounds wonderful. But how do we get there? Like you've described this great world. But how do we get to that world? Can you describe some of the work that you two have kind of worked on to achieve that degrowth world? Because I know that's one of the key questions that continually is brought up. And so I'd be really curious to hear some of the work you're doing and maybe share what Degrow NYC even is.
Yeah, so, Jamie and I first founded Degrow NYC last December, and it's basically a collective of organizers of color and people from the global South. And the reason why it's that way is because, we want to uniquely focus on issues that most impact communities of color and people from the global South, issues like prisons, the military industrial complex, they all uniquely affect communities that are most marginalized in the US and abroad. And so in order to get there, education is just one big step out of many. And, we don't want to rush into organizing just for the sake of organizing. I think we've seen that mistake made all too often in the past. And so, our first step is just getting the ideas of degrowth out to as many people as possible. And just getting people to talk about it, because it really is like a completely alternative paradigm to what we're used to. And what we're seeing within a lot of leftist circles and policy circles is that they're still focused on the idea of growth, economic growth, and how that is going to like make people's lives better. But we're obviously in disagreement with that, and we want people to realize that a better world is possible, and it doesn't have to be through the GDP model or anything like that.
Yeah. I think the most important thing in terms of how we get anywhere is to really commit to an organization. Because when you think of really any work that we have to accomplish, you can't do it alone, and you can't really do it spontaneously. It needs planning. It needs people with different skill sets. And I also think one of like the challenges of organizing in the US especially is just the level of individualism that has been ingrained in us. And that even shows up in organizations because that tendency, doesn't just go away. You really have to work on correcting that and internalizing like collective movement. So, you'll see in different organizations, like one person who's like really ambitious and, want to maybe have like careerist motives and may not be like as invested into the base or the organization. You're going to see organizations like that fail or, go out pretty quickly. You really need to be developing each individual person in the organization so that we can really all internalize like what it means and what it looks like to come together and to work together towards a certain goal, and really align together on like how change happens. And that's really what we've been focusing on in Degrow NYC. Like Erica is saying, we really want the idea of degrowth to spread. One of our members in a meeting, I remember saying, like, she was like, I want degrowth to have its abolition moment in the way that abolition did in 2020. Now it's an idea that is so much more embraced, and it didn't just happen in 2020. Like, organizers have been devoting their lives to abolition for decades now. And so we're starting small, but eventually degrowth will be an idea that people understand and want to debate and develop further. and apply it to this country specifically, because this is where we need it.
Yeah, I think, Jamie, that's a really kind of great point, linking it towards the abolition moment, where I think some of these things about degrowth hadn't really been articulated or thought or even wrestled with. And I think something in your piece last year for us, where you talked about kind of degrowth as a pathway, or degrowth not as an end goal, but as a pathway to decolonization, but also in your piece, your both piece this year, where you talked about degrowth and organizing and needing to have organization first. I think like organization and coming together on like a common frame of reference. And I think that's something you've done really well, is kind of locate what that would be. And so I was wondering, something people have asked is like, just as people ask of the abolition movement, what does an abolition campaign look like? What could a degrowth campaign look like? And what are you, and specifically potentially for Degrow NYC, where do you envision going with it? Or is that something that's still being worked out, of course, due to your organizational principles?
I can start. Erica's like, yeah, you know, I mean, in content, it can differ greatly, I think, but for as long as the form of the organization is, you know, maintains a revolutionary structure, one that really prioritize degrowth values, then it's going to be a degrowth campaign. So, you know, the types of different campaigns can look like closing down prisons, but also at the same time, making sure that new ones aren't being built, and that there's like structural ways for healing and like reintegration, and, you know, removing the reasons that we even had to build prisons, stopping pipelines. Definitely, I think any work to reduce the size and the scope of the US military is a degrowth campaign. For our friends in Europe, our degrowth friends in Europe, like trying to get your countries to pull out of NATO would be a degrowth campaign. I mean, it can really look like so much. I just think what's more important is, what is the structure of the organization? How are you relating with your members? How are you building community while you're working on those various campaigns that really speak more to what degrowth is than other factors?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially with regards to like, you know, the US military complex, that definitely needs to be dismantled. And that's, you know, one of the bigger goals of degrowth. You know, the US military is the largest polluter in the world, and that's not something that's often reckoned with enough among environmental and climate activists. You know, I think degrowth brings something new to the table in terms of climate organizing, with things like the Green New Deal and other policy proposals. We get a lot of discussion around like building more renewable energy infrastructure and creating new jobs. But degrowth focuses on, you know, creating a better life. And one of the ways you can do that is by preventing harm. You know, how many times has harm been actively created by building new prisons, maintaining them, building new military bases across the world? Also that the US can have, you know, unfettered access to world markets. And that's at, you know, our benefit in a way. You know, we are at the core, we are living in the imperial center of the world, and, you know, our extraction of resources across the world, and especially countries in the global south, you know, that's at our benefit. That's at the benefit of the wealthy in the US and, you know, people more broadly speaking. And so in order to tackle that, you know, these wasteful practices and these exploitative models, we need to scale that back, and that can take form by dismantling the military industrial complex and looking at trade, you know, our trade deals with other countries.
Awesome. And you've said a lot there, both of you, and I want to come back to some of those things. But I think one thing that you say in one of your papers in one of your studies for us is you say, I think your opening line is degrowth is not about the global south. It is for the global north specifically. And I know this is a critique that is often levied against degrowth and degrowth movements, and often just not engaging with the actual principles of degrowth. But can you first talk about what you mean by that? Like I've heard people within the UN spaces be like, degrowth does not work for my constituencies in the global south specifically. And to me, that reads as a misreading and misunderstanding of degrowth, but I'd love to hear you all get into it and talk about it.
Yeah, degrowth has some haters. I don't know that they know what degrowth is, but I do think people are certainly afraid of, giving up their private property. But, if you were to really dissect what degrowth is, it's about the infinite growth of the economy and the free market. And if we wanted to reduce that, degrow that, then really only the countries or the institutions or the entities that are benefiting from that infinite growth or are controlling it or just have outsized access to it are the actors that should be degrown. And those actors are nowhere in the global south. They're all located in the global north. Majority are in America. So if you had, even a basic understanding of what degrowth was concerned with, I think you would instinctively understand it is concerned with the global north and not the south. And in fact, degrowth in the global north would allow the global south to flourish and really, act independently and have, sovereignty would be restored.
Yeah, Jamie brings up a great point on how, degrowth would allow, countries in the global south, especially to flourish and, pursue their own sovereignty. Degrowth isn't like neoliberalism where it needs to be exported and molded into every other country it invades. It allows countries the opportunity to pursue democratic means to, advance the standard of living for other people. And so it's not about invading other countries to implant degrowth. We're not about that, obviously. And so I think what's really important to recognize is that it's about community and what the community wants. If the community wants to build a cooperative housing, that's something that they can pursue without intervention from, multinational corporations. Why is land in Colombia being infringed upon? Why is indigenous territory constantly being encroached upon? That's because oil companies want to exploit other countries' resources. And degrowth aims to descale that production, that consumption of how much we need constantly from the earth. And the only reason neoliberalism is even enforced upon other countries is so that it's to maintain a certain standard of living that we don't necessarily need. We can opt for a more simpler life. We can opt for a type of living where we can have our basic needs met without contributing to climate catastrophe.
I think that's a point, and I think this is where many of the bad faith critiquers will come out and say, oh, so you're just arguing for austerity for everyone on the planet, or you're just arguing for Malthusian limits and not thinking or not recognizing kind of that there has been a lot written on this from a degrowth perspective and that there are a lot of this going on. How do you kind of continue building the degrowth analysis when you have to deal with that on one end, and then how you reconcile kind of degrowth with the Green New Deal? Are they compatible? Are they symbiotic? I know this is something that Jamie, when you first came with the pitch to write about degrowth, I think over 2 years ago now, you were saying much to Erica's point here, it was predicated on kind of exporting a Green New Deal globally. And it was kind of that export-based model of thinking one idea has to reign supreme and kind of go everywhere, where you were saying degrowth is not that. And so I'd love for you to like say where they kind of intersect, what if degrowth and the Green New Deal are compatible, if they work together, or if you see them as kind of competing ideologies or differing ideologies, and where those intersections and differences are.
Yeah, there's a really good book on this, People's Green New Deal by Max All. I don't know how to say his last name. But you know, he would argue, and I would also agree, like it really depends on which Green New Deal we're talking about, because certainly not anything that's been proposed by the federal government, or I guess only the Democratic Party, because it's not like the Republicans are proposing their own Green New Deal. And then, you know, I think like state levels too, and city levels too, there's different Green New Deal packages. But, you know, I think for a Green New Deal to be at all complementary with a degrowth vision, it would certainly require some sort of like ecological reparations, or the global north paying ecological debt. It would have to include the dissolution of the US military. Like Erica was saying, the US military really clears the way for land grabs, land expansion, resource and labor exploitation. It's also eating up more than half of our country's federal budget, and we have to pay taxes for it while not receiving any sort of assistance from the federal government during a global pandemic. And I think it would also really need to require institutions like the IMF or the World Bank that control, again, like the countries and their economies that influence their standard of living, as well as, the different companies of Wall Street would really all need to dissolve for any major climate action to be something that is serious about what is happening today.
I'd love to kind of come to Erica on a specific element of that you mentioned, Jamie, because you brought up the IMF and the World Bank, and something that we often, and just for our audience, Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung NYC, we have special consultative status with ECOSOC at the UN, Economic and Social Affairs, and we kind of cover UN processes. And so we're thinking through the international agencies often, and we are often a voice of critique in a space that sorely needs it. And so something that I've been questioning and thinking about, like, how could degrowth engage with international agencies with trade agreements? Could you have trade agreements that support degrowth? Could we reform any institutions internationally to kind of do these climate reparations, to do these kind of degrowth principles to kind of facilitate this transformation? Or are institutions so far gone that it is impossible to do so? And sorry, Erica, for such a loaded question, but good luck.
That is a lot of questions. So I'll try my best to tackle some of them. So I think, there's a very big focus on international trade, right? But what really we need to seek out are alternatives. And that doesn't mean no trade at all. That can mean regional trade, trade within Africa, trade within Asia, countries within the continent working with each other. A big legacy of colonialism in Africa is the railroad system. But how it was set up was that railroads would kind of just extract resources out of Africa to Europe, not, facilitate trade within the different countries in Africa itself. So that's like a big problem with, trade in Africa today, and why they're still struggling why they're still working on like developing economic relationships with each other. And with regards to whether or not we can reform like institutions, that I personally don't think we can even reform institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. And that's because they're spearheaded by countries of the global north, countries who have an incentive to, maintain this very unequal system of global capitalism that exploits countries in the global south. The only reason, countries in the global north are able to maintain a certain standard of living is because it is contributing and maintaining the underdevelopment of countries in the global south. So, it's funny because like those type of institutions, they've made a lot of like reforms in terms of like, oh, we care about indigenous people. Well, we passed a lot of these new green measures, but that's really just more of a publicity thing, because in fact, they're still carrying out development projects that are disastrous to the environment and to indigenous communities all across the world. They're still carrying out fossil fuel projects when they say they care about climate change. So the hypocrisy of it is very evident, and we shouldn't be fooled by these hollow reforms that institutions like the IMF and World Bank are taking out. In terms of like, trade deals and that kind of stuff, I think, people in the US can fight for more equitable trade deals. They can fight for better working standards, environmental protections, and those might have limitations themselves. I think, I remember I took a class on international trade in college, and my professor said, oh, with climate change, it'll melt away a lot of ice, so that'll open up new waterways for facilitating trade. And I think that's a bogus idea. People who are invested in this global economic system don't think climate change is going to be an impediment to trade. And I say that trade is going to be effective, but trade is also exacerbating, the conditions of the climate crisis. In order to buy something from, a multinational corporation, to buy a $5 t-shirt, that is shipped across several different parts of the world just so that we could have it the next day. I think that's outrageous. We don't necessarily need to continue maintaining this expectation that we need the cheapest goods at, every time we need it right away. I think we need to learn to live within a more simpler lifestyle, like I said before, and recognize that, we need to downscale the rate at which we're consuming.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and actually leads right into my next question, because I think something that anyone in the degrowth movement talks about is GDP is a failed measurement and is a failed indicator. And I know that there are countries around the world that have gone through different other indicators. There's kind of Bhutan with their happiness index. I believe New Zealand is attempting a different one as well. And then there are principles like Summa Kasai, Buen Vivir, all throughout the world that kind of like guide certain cultures towards a different belief. But I'm curious if for you both, like, what would a degrowth indicator, or could you envision as a degrowth indicator looking like?
I think kind of pulling back to organizing. I think a degrowth indicator in terms of organizing is, I mean, this is gonna sound kind of cheesy, but really like changing within. What am I trying to say? I don't know. Growing up in the empire, especially if you've been, born and raised here, if you have generations of families here, I think, you've been told that you're exceptional. You've also been so far removed from the site of production. again, the level of individualism, and just the private accumulation and the infinite accumulation as something that is a good and something to be proud of. Of course, that accumulation being at the expense of someone else. I think if you are organizing towards degrowth, those like tendencies, those behaviors, or those desires should start to really go away. And I think how you relate from there on with, people, but especially people of the global South, colonized peoples, I think will change. And you'll realize, when you're stepping into a space, you don't actually like have all the solutions, but are there to really learn from like the indigenous wisdom that exists, from like the organizing history and experience of colonized people across the global South who've had successful attempts at revolution, and in some cases have succeeded at revolution. Just coming with that, I think you'll be coming to this work and approach really anything in your life from a different point of view. I think that's a huge degrowth indicator, just interpersonally. I know you were kind of asking about the bigger economy, but again, it's more like, the content can vary, but as long as like that change is happening internally, I think your work itself is going to start to, really show like what degrowth is talking about.
Cool. And then I have just about one more question for you all, but before I do so, we have about 10 minutes afterwards for questions from the audience. On the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can see a Q&A tab. I know a lot of people have been having kind of conversation in the chat window, and that's wonderful and really appreciated and really excellent conversation. I was just following up on it during that last answer. But if you have any specific questions for our panelists or for our designers or about Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, you can drop them into this Q&A tab, and we'll have some time for this in the next few minutes afterwards. And I do see that someone dropped in Jason Hickel's sustainability development or sustainable development index, and I think as an indicator, and I think it's something that's quite interesting, because I think often talked about in the UN system is the sustainable development goals, and these SDGs are kind of what you all talk about for what the global South can achieve if there was not this imperial nature from the global North, if there was a degrowth world where they could achieve these standards that I don't think anyone in the world is arguing against. They'd love 100% literacy rates all throughout the world. They'd love to eradicate world hunger, yet we remain so far away from them. And so I think transitioning to these different types of indicators, while helpful, may be also just kind of difficulties. One thing that I wanted to ask, and this is kind of as we're in a moment where we're inherently changing our economy. We are shifting. There is a transition from fossil fuels into renewable energy, and that is a good thing. It is not going nearly quick enough, but market forces are even going that way because fossil fuel companies see the profit available in renewables, and climate activists are fighting for public ownership of renewables, but getting towards more renewables on the grid and such. And how do we make sure that there isn't this, and like inherent behind it all is we need to scale up renewables. We need to grow renewables, but growth is what we try to avoid when we talk about degrowth or growth for growth's sake. And so how do you, in scaling up an industry or scaling down an industry, what are some sectors that we're thinking of scaling down, like you talked about the military, et cetera? How do you scale up renewables in such a way that maintains degrowth principles so that it isn't just growing a new industry and building a new industry for profit's sake or growth's sake. And I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest problems within the climate movement today is kind of unequivocal support for expanding clean energy infrastructure. And, while that's definitely necessary in the fight against fossil fuels, I think we also need to recognize, how much energy are we consuming and is that sustainable? Do we really need to build so much new clean energy infrastructure that, it is able to meet our current demand, or should we reduce our demand for energy? And obviously we're all here today because we believe in the latter. So that's just, one point I wanted to make. In terms of, like what sectors should we grow, what sectors should we, degrow? I think a common misconception with degrowth that I wanted to address is that like degrowth doesn't necessarily seek to like reduce every single sector in the economy, right? We recognize that some are necessary for, human well-being, like health and education. But there are sectors like we talked about, the military, that need to be scaled back and eventually abolished. I also want to bring in like advertising, in addition to the fossil fuel industry. Advertising has been such a monumental industry in creating these like artificial needs on what we need and what we need to buy all the time, that I think that's also a very important thing to recognize, in terms of how our culture is shaped within society. I think advertising helps companies maintain that grip over society and what we think we need when we actually don't need it.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Erica. And so I'm going to go to some of these audience questions and try to get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. So perhaps some of these answers will go quicker, some of them may not. But Clarissa Chen started us off with, how would you suggest bringing the concept of degrowth into daily life and sharing it within your circles?
Sorry, I was just reading through the other questions. I mean, you know your life better than we do, where you think it might fit. It could be, sharing the pamphlet video, or, inviting them to an event, reading an article together. Engaging in different campaign activities that are, degrowth.
Cool. And I'll get to Eduardo Lalo Rema's question at the end when sharing more about Rosa Lux NYC. So we'll save that one for the conclusion. I see Colin Murphy's in here asking about, is Degrowth NYC looking to connect with other organizations on the left to organize on degrowth? Does the US degrowth movement need another conference to help build itself? What do you think? The last one took place in 2018.
No, Jamie, you brought up the idea of hosting a degrowth conference with a bunch of organizations. So I feel like you're more equipped to take this on.
Yeah, I think we're definitely already working with other organizations, because so many of our members are organizers themselves that are part of other organizations. Many of us are involved in, different work throughout the city. I do think we want to stay pretty local in our focus. And when the time is right, try to build a more national network. There is definitely interest though, we hear from other folks already a part of an organization, or just, an individual looking to develop an organization that really want to learn more about degrowth. And we're trying to, just learn more ourselves so that we are in a position to, lead trainings and workshops on degrowth for other organizations.
Cool. The next two I'm going to kind of mix together, Jack and Nicholas's, just for the sake of time. Jack talks about how you haven't said much about capitalism is a source here it is a source of accumulation. Isn't it far more important to demand degrowth than downshifting our private consumption? And Nicholas talks about kind of community land trust movement and alternatives to kind of the capitalist housing market. And I think bringing them together makes a lot of sense, because I think of the CLT movement a little bit as one of those prefigurative things that we've talked about and heard about in degrowth. And I'm curious where degrowth comes down on the capitalism question. I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear you talk about this.
So
Yes.
you can go ahead.
You sure? You go ahead.
Okay. So I feel like I can better answer Jack's question. We definitely critique capitalism in, how it fosters the current climate crisis today and everything bad with the world. And so in terms of when I talk about our need to reduce consumption, I don't want to propagate the narrative that it's on us as individual consumers to tackle the climate crisis. Obviously, that's not what degrowth is about. So I don't necessarily see, individual consumption as mutually exclusive with the idea of degrowth capitalism, right? When I bring up advertising, that industry was created to sell the surplus, the extra goods that companies can sell back into the public. And so, in terms of what we need to do grow, capitalism is kind of at the center of it. We don't disagree with that. In fact, we think we should pursue other economic models in terms of how we produce, how we consume. In fact, private consumption is heavily tied to production today. And so I don't think those two things are again, mutually exclusive. Yeah.
And to clarify, Nicholas was not calling the CLT movement a alternative to capitalism, was asking about alternatives to the CLT movement. And I apologize for misreading their question before. And so if you have anything to say about kind of prefiguration and alternatives to the CLT movement, would love to hear. If not, we do have a lot of questions and can move on to. Go for it, Jamie.
I will just recommend this book, which we actually just discussed some excerpts from, but in DEGROW NYC. But there's a book called Housing for Degrowth, it's just a collection of essays on housing and degrowth, and maybe there's something there. And yes, definitely to capitalism. Sometimes it's so obvious we don't say it, but definitely degrowth, you can just say we're, same thing as communism.
So I see from Max, our next question was, where do you put the Chinese economy in the global North, global South dichotomy? And then, yeah, go for that one quickly, because that might be a quick answer from you all. And then we have a few more questions, and I'm going to try to rapid fire through them as much as possible.
So China is, a former semi-colonial country that had its own revolution, kicked out the foreign imperialists, and successfully instituted a communist government. For me, I personally believe, not speaking for anyone else in here, but I believe China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, in providing an alternate, way to develop economically, and not do business using the US dollar, and not being, economically or militarily pressured to do certain things for the international market. I believe that is very much in line with degrowth. But I know that's something, we need to still do more research around and have more conversations around. But I know just in large part, the, Chinese economy and their banks are still state-owned. the needs of the masses still come first. Profit is not the main primary motive for the economy. So I would certainly not include them with the global north.
Okay, moving on. And just for our audience, we have a lot of Rosa Lux publications on the Belt and Road Initiative that may provide different views as well from things that Jamie's put out. And so just sharing all of them from our, also we have a China office as well that produces publications on these topics and want to just promote that as well. I see Ethan's asking about alignment or intersection between the fight for right to repair laws and degrowth. I'm less familiar with this. I don't know if the panelists are. Right to repair laws. If not, maybe Ethan, you can share some more in the chat and we can perhaps follow up afterwards on this. Moving on, I see Daria asked kind of about the care economy and what it's come to mean in our current world. And I'm wondering if, how do you message degrowth for popular understanding so people don't think just vote or to get rid of the two-party system in a certain way? And I think you all kind of talked about this earlier, and so I'm going to just try to breeze through this. You talked about it and also messaging it and how your organization's first off on messaging. And so I think you all answer some of that. If you could maybe talk to, and just because we're short on time, Addie's question about claims that degrowthers are just primitivists or anti-technology. And then kind of questions from Alex and an anonymous attendee, challenges you've had in Degrow NYC, and then how does one join Degrow NYC? And unfortunately, I'll close out on that part for your all section, and then I'll give closing words for Rosa Lux. But sorry for rushing through these questions, but I know we can go a couple minutes over if we have a really great audience here.
Wait, which one are we answering first? Audie's?
Yeah,
Or the two-party
Audie, and then the two Degrow NYC ones would be great.
Audie, who's saying that? No, I'm just kidding. Erica, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's like really funny. That is definitely like a common misconception that people have about degrowth, but degrowth isn't necessarily anti-technology. It's more so, against that relying on technology to get us out of this climate crisis. So, it's against the idea of eco-modernism where we can just rely on technical quick fixes to get us out of the mess that was created in the first place. So I think that's, one aspect of our how we approach technology. In terms of whether or not we're primitivists, some of us might be, I'm kidding. But I don't necessarily think that, but I think degrowth advocates for a simpler life. So it means, not necessarily relying on very complex technological things that we need to get by in life. It means just living in a home that, isn't 50 square feet. I mean, I don't know how square feet works. I don't have spatial conception. Anyway, I think for example,
Erica, the room you're in is more than 50 square feet.
Okay. Anyway, I'm not a math person, but what I'm trying to say is that what we see today from certain eco-modernists is that, we should have green buildings. We should have smart homes that monitor how much energy use we're doing. But these homes are also taking up a lot of space in general. So we want to advocate for something where we don't necessarily have all this advanced technology to monitor how much water we're using, but more so something simple where we're not taking up a whole ton of space that we don't necessarily need.
Awesome, thank you. And then Jamie, if you want to talk about the Degrow NYC, some of the challenges you've had, how someone becomes a member, and then I'll bring it home just answering Lalo's final question and try to be done. And we should try to be out in the next 2 to 3 minutes.
I feel like the biggest challenges has been the conditions of life under capitalism are hard. we have like public city employees, like teachers, just various organizers, and people are really tired. And, I think they still come and, want to organize because it's one of the only areas in their life where their labor has meaning, but it's still labor at the end of the day. And there are, obstacles that from, really giving it your all. But if we just did an open recruitment and closed it and are, starting to build with the new members that came in, but you can still email us and we'll definitely open up for more members at another time. So I can drop the email too for our group.
Awesome. And then to the question about Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung NYC, we have a bunch of kind of, in this period, a bunch of webinars and events that are online and digital. We also are putting out a bunch of studies in the upcoming short-term future. And we will actually be putting out one with the Spumoni Cooperative in the next couple of weeks on labor and job guarantee and what that looks like, and another concept trying to deconstruct for the left that may be misconstrued or misunderstood. And so come better weather, better conditions, less Omicron, less pandemic, we are active in the New York community. We hopefully next month are able to do actually a series of film screenings my colleague Kazembe is putting on and leading with the Maisels Film Center up in Harlem for Black History Month, and having some really cool films for that. And so I highly recommend everyone checking out the rosalux.nyc website, our social media as well, for staying up. But all of our events, all of our publications are always completely free. Right now we have on our website, if you want to have our newest publication, is called Letters from Rosa. It is a reimagining of kind of the letters that we have. And these letters from Rosa Luxemburg over 100 years ago, or just, now over 100 years ago. And reimagining with contemporary authors, kind of like Paul Mason writing letters back and forth. And those are all available to be sent to you as a book completely free if you just order one on our website right now. And we're running low on our first printing. So if you do want one, I highly recommend getting your address and everything in there. But otherwise, I thank you all so much for spending the time with us this Thursday night. I thought this conversation went really well. I want to thank Andreas for leading us off. I want to thank Emily, Annie, and Warren for designing this, and Jamie and Erica for sharing their brilliance and ideas with us all. And I want to thank all of you, our audience, and we hope to have you soon for another one shortly. Thank you all. I really, really appreciate it and hope you have a great evening. Bye-bye.